So this is the title of my presentation, how Thermonet is involved as a new paradigm for district heating from 4th generation to 5th generation district heating. So my name is hard to pronounce in English, so you can call me Søren Skjold Andersen. And I am, as Ignacy told you, involved in shallow geothermal boreholes through the company Geodrilling in Denmark. I know there's an international company as well, but this is a small Danish company. And I'm also involved as chairman of the board for the association Thermonet Denmark. And this is a non-profit. Educationally wise, I'm an economist. I hold a master's degree in economics and business administration, management and leadership. And I've been working with geothermal for nearly 10 years now. And I assume you get the slides, so here you have my email, and feel free to write me if you have any questions. So, I'm going to talk a bit about making a paradigm shift, because that can be very frustrating, and this is what we are seeing with the transition from 4th generation to 5th generation. So I have a small puzzle here. Paradigm shift is not as simple as this puzzle, but this gives you a glimpse of the trouble. And I know the word paradigm is highly it's a vague term. It doesn't have a sharp definition. So here I'll just use it as a distinct set of concepts or thought patterns around district heating. And the benefit of having a well-established paradigm is that you can have very efficient processes. You can solve known problems very fast if you have an established paradigm. But that comes with the price of sacrifice and effectiveness, that you can't solve novel problems because your paradigm is in conflict. And this is what I hope you experience with this small puzzle. I know for myself, when I saw this puzzle, I thought, well, it's an even number, 30, and there are only uneven numbers to choose from, so you can't add up 3 uneven numbers and get an even number, so it's simple, the puzzle is unsolvable. But that's just not the case. As you notice, there are numbers, but those are numbers on ping pong balls. So you can turn them around, that's not a problem. You can just turn around the 9, you have a 6, and the problem is easily solved. So your paradigm matters. So if you think of this just as numbers, not as numbers on ping pong balls, you can't solve the problem, but it is solvable. But it gets worse, because this is actually an animal. This is a picture of an animal. And there are some simple questions I could ask. Well, is it big? Can it fly? Is it a mammal? How many legs does it have? And I assume that many of you will wonder, why is he asking these questions? It makes no sense. There is no animal to be seen there. But that's because the animal is only there if you know how to read the image. This is a stereogram. And does anyone have looked at stereograms as a child and know how to read them? Yeah, there are a few people nodding around. So some of you may be able to see the animal quite clearly, and a lot of you won't. So you won't be able to answer the questions. And I have discovered that when I show this image to people who don't know how to read stereograms, if they try really hard, at some point they will discover an animal in this image. But it will not be the right one. So this is actually a fly. It's an insect. It has 6 legs. It's small. You can practice on this when you get the slides. So the traditional district heating in Denmark is a fairly well-established paradigm. We had our first combined heat and power plants in the early 1903, actually. We got the first combined heat and power plants. So we've been at this for a long time in Denmark. In the 1970s, we took a big leap in traditional district heating. I think we really set speed on the 3rd generation in the 70s. And we did that with a heating supply law. At that time, we had about 30% district heating coverage in Denmark. It was before I was born, so I don't know if that's a fact, but I have read it somewhere. So today, around 74, somewhere between 60 and 70% are covered by traditional district heating. And in Denmark, we are really pushing the fourth generation, so the movement from the third to the fourth. And this movement is all about lowering the temperature of the grid. So this is what we are doing vigorously in Denmark right now. But we have this, a third of the country does not have district heating, and that's because we have a lot of natural gas and other sorts of heating supply in those areas. And there's quite a good reason for that, because the paradigm that we are working with also in Denmark up until now has been that heating is a matter of combustion. You have to burn stuff to get heat. So in Denmark, it's a fairly cold country. You can see from the whiteness of my skin that we don't get a lot of sunshine. So we don't actually think a lot about cooling in Denmark, but that can become a problem because we think a lot about insulation, and we do get some warm summer days. So the paradigm we have established in Denmark is that cities have these centralized combustion units that distribute heat through insulated pipes at fairly high temperatures. We are trying to lower it, but we don't get below 60, 70 degrees because we need to supply hot water. So rural areas, they have a problem because the energy density is not high enough for this scheme to work. So we have natural gas, oil boilers, wood burners, and stuff in the rural areas of Denmark. But the future of heating supply is not combustion, it's heat pumps. And I'm sure all of you have already heard that. And I have recently became very fond of saying that this is not a matter of politics, it's a matter of physics. But of course, physics is not always the thing that gets into the politics. So I like to show this slide about how you can use 1 cubic meter of natural gas. And this is from an old cartoon we made in 2017. So you can use in Denmark 1 cubic meter of natural gas to burn at the house in a natural gas boiler. And you get 11 kilowatt hours of heat from that 1 cubic meter of natural gas. But you can also do something we are fairly good at in Denmark. You can move the natural gas through the pipes to a combined heat and power plant. Then you can get 5.5 kilowatt hours of heat and 5.5 kilowatt hours of electricity, roughly. You can transport the electricity to a house that has a heat pump connected to the ground, and you can multiply the heat by extracting heat from the ground and get somewhere between 22 to 27.5 kilowatt hours from the same cubic meter of gas. So you can more than double the outcome of heat from the same resource if you utilize heat pumps. Now, this is old news. There is a quote here on the right from Thomas Edison, the guy who invented the light bulb. I think I'll just read it for you so it gets through the translation. And his language is not too polite, so excuse me for that. This scheme of combustion in order to get power makes me sick to think of. It is so wasteful. It is just the old foolish Prometheus idea, and the father of Prometheus was a baboon. When we learn how to store electricity, we will cease being apes ourselves. Until then, we are tailless orangutans. You see, we should utilize natural forces and thus get all of our power. Sunshine is a form of energy, and the winds and the tides are manifestations of energy. Do we use them? Oh no, we burn up wood and coal as renters burn up the front fence for fuel. We live like squatters, not as if we owned the property. There must surely come a time when heat and power will be stored in unlimited quantities in every community, all gathered by natural forces. Electricity ought to be as cheap as oxygen, for it cannot be destroyed. So this is 1910, Thomas Edison. More recently, but still a long time ago, the American Emery Lovins made a similar statement, just much more politely and using scientific terms. And there is a great documentary from 1982 about how we solved the energy crisis. And I can really recommend it. As one of the speakers said, there is no good or bad energy, but there is definitely bad use of energy. And burning different sources like gas and wood and oil for heating houses, that's low quality heating, that's a bad use of high quality energy. So this is just a way of portraying it as thermodynamic crime. It does not make sense to do that. It's not to shame out anyone, it's just saying don't continue down that road because it's not a good use of resources. There are better alternatives, and they are energy efficiency and the use of heat pumps. So when we talk about heat pumps, air is not the good medium to do that. This is a small drawing illustrating that. This is a fairly known scenario in Denmark where there are 0 degrees Celsius outside. And let's just imagine that the building on the left is a freezing house. We store some goods that needs to be frozen. And on the right is a storage house, so we just need some fair storage temperatures in there. Now, what the heat pump does is basically just it moves heat out from the blue building, and on the other side it moves heat from the air into the building. So we have one heat pump on each house. Now, the problem is that we use this as a lot air as a heat source, but it's not very efficient because when the air is cold, we need the heat, and when the air is warm, we need cooling. So there is a better way of doing that. And the better way is to use shallow geothermal as a medium, because the Earth is a fantastic storage for heat when the temperature is low, because the ground is cool when the air is hot, and the ground is hot when the air is cool. And the other part is, and that's probably in my view the most important one, is that it's not noisy and it's not visible. You have a beautiful city here in Barcelona, but you have a lot of these air conditioning units. And it would be good for the energy system to get rid of them. You would have more efficiency and a better use of energy. And it would brighten up the city. And we often overlook that from the technical perspective, that we're just solving a technical challenge, but in the big paradigm of preserving a nice city, this should matter much more than anything else, the noise and the looks of things. So what we can do when we start doing this, we can reduce the number of units. We can move the heat from the building that needs to be cold to the building that needs to be warm, and have fewer units, fewer heat pumps. Now this is of course just an illustration that works for this specific scenario, but I'll get back to that later. The benefit of passive cooling I'll demonstrate with a simple graph from a building in 2 buildings in Denmark on one of the days that in Denmark is hot. So you see an average temperature rising up around 29 degrees. I know that that's not really hot for these areas, but in Denmark we call that a very hot summer day. So there are 2 different houses. There's an office building that don't have cooling, but it's very, very well insulated, so it can save energy in the winter. But that also means that the heat inside the building is actually much warmer than outside, even during the nighttime. And then there is a house that can utilize this passive cooling. It's just as well insulated, but you can move heat out of the house with boreholes. And this is where the idea of the Thermonet comes in, because with the Thermonet you can start connecting multiple houses and you get a bigger battery in the ground you can use to balance out the energy demands. And the Thermonet is just defined as a thermal grid that transports energy from different sources, crossing cadastral boundaries at a temperature relatively close to the temperature of the ground. So no insulated pipes uninsulated pipes. That's one of the paradigm shifts, uninsulated pipes. So in very simple terms, these are, a thermonet connects several geothermal heat pumps with shared energy sources by using uninsulated pipes. The main difference to traditional district heating is the low temperature. Many of other principles is the same that we know of in Denmark. And you can do this on different scales. What we have done most of in Denmark now is the top one, where you only have the thermonet and you have the heat pumps inside the buildings. So the thermonet is used to connect those heat pumps in the buildings to a shared energy source. But you could also do the thermonet in combination with fourth generation district heating. So you have the fourth generation network putting out insulated pipes to the buildings from a geothermal heat pump of a bigger scale, and then you connect these big geothermal heat pumps with a thermonet of uninsulated pipes to the heat source. In Denmark, we see a lot of private customers putting up air-to-water heat pumps, and we see a lot of the utility companies putting up very big air-to-water heat pumps. And as I just showed you, air is not super efficient. There is a better way of balancing the energy demand with geothermal. So what are the novel issues we can solve by making a paradigm shift to the fifth generation of district heating? Well, there's a lot of academic discussion whether the fifth generation actually exists, and that mainly comes from researchers in fourth generation that thinks that this is a well-established concept and there's no need to have a fifth generation because they already include in the fourth generation what they think the fifth generation set out to do, mainly introduce heat pumps and renewables. But that's not at all what the fifth generation's most important contribution is. The most important contribution is that we extend the reach of district heating. So in Denmark, we usually say that we have around this 60, 65, 66% district heating coverage, and we have some cities that don't have access to it. The most ambitious plans for Denmark is to increase district heating to 70%. But that's only from the fourth generation perspective. If we look from a fifth generation perspective, the energy density is not important anymore. There can be bigger distances between the houses, and it would still make sense to do district heating with a thermonet. So we postulate that you can go up to around 90 or even more district heating coverage in Denmark if you use fifth generation. So this is actually one of the main benefits, that is the reach of district heating. The other one is that you can get this synergy between heating and cooling, and you rarely hear people in fourth generation district heating talk about cooling, and that's because that many of the academic authorities are from Denmark and we don't use a lot of cooling. But this is very important for an area like this where cooling is very vital. This is, I think personally we'll see a lot more thermonets in Denmark when we transition from biomass in the district heating sector and to heat pumps when we learn that air does not work as well in the cold temperatures. So how do you introduce a paradigm shift? Well, one of the things we have found in Denmark works very well is to use a word that no one has ever heard of before, and that is thermonet. So when you talk about these generations of district heating, you come across the issue that a lot of people think they know what you're talking about. They think they know that it's about some insulated pipes and that you're just lowering the temperature even further. But that's not the case with a thermonet. You're pulling the insulation off the pipes. So in order to establish a common understanding, it's very good to start from a completely blank sheet. So we introduced this word, thermonet, in Denmark, and we made a non-profit association to promote the spread and development of the thermonet. So the heat pumps are coming in Denmark, we know that for sure. We are just working to make them connected with pipes instead of being air source heat pumps. And we really stress this synergy between heating and cooling, because it's so beautiful to see when you remove heat from a building that you put it into use in another building instead of just cooling into the air. And we really want the Thermonet to enjoy the same benefits that the traditional district heating has in Denmark through the heating supply law. And we have a wide array of members. We established the organization in 2020, just before the virus hit. So we set out to be a virtual organization. We hold mainly virtual meetings because we want to span as wide as possible. We have 25% of the Danish municipalities as members of the association now, and we have utility companies, installers, contractors, manufacturers, academics. We have a wide array of members, and that is exactly what you need for a paradigm shift. It's systemic innovation, and that's really, really hard to do. You will run into multiple chicken and egg problems, and you need to solve all of them for it to work. And we are still growing as an organization. It's becoming hard to get all the logos on the slide, but it's still possible. I know I'm missing a few already, but I think they can live with that. So we have 12 existing thermonets in Denmark, and it's not very impressive numbers-wise, but Denmark is a small country, so it's fairly impressive. They use all of them individual geothermal heat pumps, and there is no grid up until now that is above a limit of 250 kilowatt as a total installation. And the law about heating supply in Denmark only comes into effect when you go above the 250 kilowatt limit. The traditional district heating is very hard to do in these places. It's simply not offered. Because we don't have the energy density in these areas to provide traditional district heating. Now this is the lighthouse project that is currently under construction. This is the first district heating grid based on a thermonet in Denmark that is above 250 kilowatt and thus constructed under the heating supply law. And it's a local district heating company that constructs the grid. And this is where the societal benefits come into play, because this small rural city, they don't have a lot of opportunities to borrow money for renovation of their homes, and they don't have a lot of opportunity for borrowing money to establish heat pumps. But the local district heating company, they can go into a city like this and offer them for an investment of zero to get their oil boiler exchanged with a geothermal heat pump. And the only thing the customer has to do is to sign up to become a co-owner of the district heating company. So it actually sounds like an offer that's too good to be true, but this is the way we do district heating in Denmark. It's also the way we do our electricity supply. All the major utility companies are owned directly or indirectly by the citizens themselves. So this way, there's a bore field constructed with, I think it will be 23 boreholes, geothermal boreholes, and connected with a grid throughout the city. And everyone who wants to participate can sign up, and those who want to wait for some reason can wait. We expect that many will take the utility company up on this offer as soon as they see the need to replace their oil boiler or air source heat pump. So this is what we think will be a lighthouse project for other utility companies in Denmark, and we see a lot of projects on the move, and this is one that is the furthest to become a concrete reality. So in Denmark, we have seen the effectiveness of having this association, Thermonet Denmark. And we see a lot of municipalities are offering their rural cities to look into, is there a possibility to create these thermonet in their cities? And a lot of the municipalities are putting thermonet into their strategic energy plans, and a great reason for this is the association, the non-profit aspect of our association, and the willingness from our members to share information on a volunteer basis. So we envision that Europe could need a Thermonet Europe association because there are a lot of names for what we're talking about today. There is the fifth generation district heating and cooling. I sometimes joke about that I get tired just from pronouncing it. So we use the abbreviation, that's not much better. And then it's like all countries have their own way of talking about this. So there are the shared ground loop arrays. I think it's fairly common in the UK. And then we have the geo-microgrids, that's from the US. And geothermal networks, that's a new one I've heard from the US as well. And the ambient loops is somewhere around Switzerland, but also in use in the UK. It's just the same, so basically it will give you the same benefits. I just prefer that the fifth generation is a good term for working with this technically detailed, academically when you need precision in your arguments. But for the private customers, they don't care about your precision. They want something simple. And the simple thing is just Thermonet. You can pronounce it easily and it makes sense. It's thermos, it's something to do with heat, and it's also something we use in combination with cooling. So we envision in Thermonet Denmark that there should be a Thermonet Europe organization that can help every country, because exactly as was said in the panel, each country is different. And one thing I have learned from working with the fifth generation is that it becomes very context dependent. It depends a lot about what are your demands and what are the available energy sources. That's not the same everywhere. There's no panacea in this solution. So we envision that, but it's not been created yet. So I invite everyone who thinks that this is something I would want to contribute to. Just let me know, and I'll sign you up, and we'll inform you as we go along with these plans. It will also be organized like Thermonet Denmark on a volunteer basis, but still as an association that can do actual work. And that was the last slide for me. Thank you.